welcome to Environmental Coffee House tonight.
Is a rapid acceleration in global climate change, which is obviously having impacts on real people, infrastructure, and of course the biosphere globally, from the Amazon rainforest to the Arctic, from your hometown all the way to the deepest ocean basin. So I think it's important for folks like me to be able to go on go out and talk to people, as many people that will listen about the changes that are underway. Regardless of what you think about mitigation or adaptation measures or not, we're in a state where the environment is very, humans have done and have baked in profound changes to the climate system, to the biosphere, that will affect one of us and those in the future. So I think being able to discuss what's happening and talk about what's happening and have realistic assessment of the state of our climate and our environment and the stabilization is very important, and we need to be aware of what's happening, because there's a lot of creatures on this planet that don't have the ability to do that, and we have the right and the ability to do so, and we should be able to communicate with each other in an honest manner about the state of affairs. It was just extremely warm relative to what it would have been back before the United States even existed. I looked over the data for the Southern Hemisphere and noted that the land, air, sea, and sea surface average for March 2019, which was around 1.2 C above pre-industrial, 1.2 to 1.3, was actually tied a record for the warmest March on record for the Southern Hemisphere. And it was also a record for the land air temperature alone. Yeah. So land masses that Australia, southern half of Africa. I know a couple months ago, parts of South America, southern tip of South America, had the hottest temperature ever observed for so far south in the Southern Hemisphere, just across the pond from West Antarctica, having temperatures near 90 degrees.
And what are the effects? I mean, on everything down there.
Well, the effects in Australia have been ugly. I mean, you've seen just endless drought, aridification of crop grazing lands, and when they're not getting drought, and they get titanic rain events that flood entire countrysides and turn them into inland seas. It seems to be an increasingly prominent problem that people don't really seem to connect the dots on. You see, all these mega floods. We call them mega floods because they're just so much bigger than anything anyone had ever seen in the past. In interior North America, the Midwest U.S., the Middle East, in Iran, and Australia, and Queensland. It's a very, very tendency towards dryness, but abruptly ended with crazy water. And I think that's the biggest threat that people don't grasp with climate change, is that you're going to be dealing with rapid swings between extremes that your infrastructure, your agriculture, everything you depend on to live as a human being can't handle.
There's a gal that's a friend of mine on the NT, she's Facebook friend, posted a picture from Australia about the trees that are dying, and it's just so sad. Today, Nicholas, I just wanted to say that today I watched all morning I was in on the climate conference. We Don't Have Time.
Yeah.
And with all of this that's happening, there's a lot of people that have a lot invested in either reversing, changing, doing. And, I didn't want to get into this quick. I just want to say that we always sound so like, oh my God, and it is not a rosy, pretty picture. But we're not on this like desert island because people are doing all kinds of things. And I have a cat that's trying to get in the room. And that just segues me to where Patrick McNulty, Patrick McNulty came in and he said, Nicholas, you should take a look at ocean mechanical thermal energy conversion. Have you seen his page, Ocean Tunnels?
Oh, a little bit.
Yeah, I haven't had it's interesting. But I mean, just like, like these, not solutions per se, but things that people are talking about doing. All kinds of mitigation and all. And that's it. I'm going to be quiet. That's what I did today, though, for Earth Day. And I was part of it because Dr. Daniel Bougie, that Antonio had on the other night, he spoke today. And he's so inspirational. Oh, my God. All right. Take it away, Nick.
No, it's fine. I actually listened I didn't get to finish the whole interview, but I listened to a portion of it. Cool. To like I think the first 30 minutes of it, and I was going to listen to more of it later tonight. But he's very very intelligent man, and I look forward to finishing the interview. And it's nice to get a perspective from someone that actually lives in Africa, because Africa, I mean, let's be frank, it just gets forgotten. Nobody seems to think about Africa. Barely in the U.S., barely people think about Canada.
Really, you're right.
Yeah, I mean,
you're right. He's just a leader. He's a leader. He inspired me. He inspired me.
I mean, the thing is that obviously most people that track my work know that I tend to believe, if you will, based on the scientific evidence that there's a 6 mass extinction going on this planet right now that's accelerating, and humans being the top of the food chain probably won't fare.
Well, that's scenario. Not a belief. That's fact.
Yeah.
We just don't have a timeline.
Yeah, we don't have a timeline. And, but in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of basically destruction because of Mother Nature turning its energy in wrath, gave it back at us. And I think that humans, regardless of the future and our survival on the planet, can do a lot to alleviate suffering and not have to just sit around and wait to die. And and I see all of these things that are happening that are the very antithesis of that. I mean the doctor yesterday was discussing the fact that in Nigeria they have a very corrupt government, and they don't seem to care about getting elected, and not about. It sounds very familiar. Seems to be.
But he was unbelievable. He was a progressive. Yeah. I mean, he really got our country. What did he say? He said that the rest of the world is basically sitting around waiting to take a bet on when the United States will collapse. Holy shit.
Yeah. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, when the hyperpower falls, is going to be a big spoils going on for everything, resources, everything else, because the United States won't be able to steal anymore. But of course, if it gets so bad to the point that the United States collapses, what's happened to everybody else?
Well, the domino effect.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe that's what has to happen. But I know we're getting away from weather. And climate and all.
It's an interdisciplinary issue, so I mean, I don't mind going off on those tangents for a little bit. But yeah, in terms of some of the extreme, just last month, I mean, we can talk about the Arctic. Obviously, the Arctic had its 5th warmest March on record, and I noted that 4 of the warmest years or Marches on record have been in the past 6 years. So So it's gotten abruptly warmer in the month of March. So you're getting progressively hotter months in the winter time because the winters are obviously the cold, so they warm the fastest. But that's beginning to expand more into the climatological spring, climatological warmer October is warmer Marches, and obviously last summer and really the past couple summers, you've seen very hot summertime months in the Arctic too, and you know, last summer we had 90-degree weather near the Arctic Ocean, and you know, with El Nino already warming the planet and sort of augmenting what climate change is doing at faster and faster speeds, you could certainly see an extremely warm spring and summer in the Arctic again. And, you know, you're already seeing the effects of that on the ice. Melt is already underway on Greenland. You know, Greenland is facing areas of above freezing temperatures near the sea, near the ice sheet. So you already have melting that would usually be typical of perhaps May happening, mid-May happening right now, you know, at the end of March, early April into mid-April. The sea ice extent is at record lows, daily record lows. Been that way for about, I think, two and a half weeks now. Maybe,
yeah, well, what's
maybe 3 weeks.
Torstein was dallying around with the Blue Ocean event, and then I read the article by oh my God, I don't know why I'm having a brain fart. Anyway, talking about this serious issue, and we've been talking about it, and it's like I just feel so powerless sometimes.
Yeah.
And as a meteorologist, how do you deal with it? What are your coping skills?
Well, I mean, you know, as a meteorologist, you know, I've been out in the weather and gone out and storm chased and experienced other types of huge weather events. And you kind of realize the insane power of Mother Nature. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, humans always like to think they're in control of everything.
Oh, yeah.
But at the end of the day, our control is an illusion based on stability that nature provided to us. And then, you know, now that stability is gone, you know, it basically started to pull away from us 250 years ago and has really started to pull away from us in the past 40 to 60 years. And, you know, now we're in a climate that's alien to the world, even from when I was born 35 years ago. It's a completely different place. It's like it's normal now. Like that, well, like it seems like Harvey was like the turning point. Not even Katrina. Katrina was sort of like, to me, in the hindsight, Katrina was like the forebearer of what was to come. You know, this is what's coming down the pike. You know, right here, this mega flood of a huge city. You know, I've been to New Orleans. I went to New Orleans like several years after Katrina and saw the water on the interstate in New Orleans. And, you know, that was like what was coming down the pike. And then here we go, Hurricane Harvey, an inland mega flood. And then now since then, it's like it's normal now. You know, you just get mega floods now. You get, you know, Wayne on Big Island, Florence, Adai, you know, some random tropical Queensland. You know, it's just normal. You know, and nobody thinks it's no climate change happening.
We all do.
Cyclone Adai, catastrophic flooding, more than 1,000 deaths, 3 million displaced, $1 billion in damage. Costiest cyclone on record for the Southwest Indian Ocean. Middle East, Southwest Asia floods. You know, destructive flooding in Iran, killed and injured hundreds, displaced hundreds of thousands, greater than $2 billion in damage. And it impacted Iraq, Syria, the UAE, Pakistan, Afghanistan. You had the U.S. Great Plains, Midwest river flood, estimated by AccuWeather, you know, with the direct impacts plus the impacts that come after the immediate event and in the longer term, $12.5 billion. Heat waves in Alaska, Canada, Northwest, just ridiculous amounts of heat, like summertime conditions in Alaska and Seattle. extreme heat in India and Australia, a violent tornado in Nepal. I mean, Nepal, a tornado that would be comparable to the devastating tornadoes you can get here on the Great Plains in the South, deep South, in Nepal. Devastating flooding in Peru, Paraguay, Ecuador, Colombia. I mean, you mentioned Indonesia. I forgot to mention Indonesia. You had 2 cyclones that struck Australia within 2 days of each other. Not particularly violent cyclones, but they produced a lot of rainfall. And the thing with geoengineering is if you don't get rid of the actual gas that is warming, that's retaining the heat and causing the energy imbalance, as they say, in the global climate system, you cannot stop climate change. Because climate change is a manifestation of the change that was done to the atmosphere. So it's an atmospheric chemistry problem. And so if you try to cool the Arctic in some way, shape, or form, well, the mid-latitudes are still warming because of the greenhouse gases. The mid to upper troposphere is still warming because of the greenhouse gases. And so there comes a point when whatever geoengineering effort you're trying to do gets overwhelmed by the fact that the rest of the planet is still warming. And it's not just the direct warming of the greenhouse gases, it's also the loops that go into accelerating that warming because the Earth is in energy imbalance, so it wants to get to that state. Applying a Band-Aid to basically to a stab wound, to a bunch of stab wounds, like one Band-Aid. It does not really tackle the heart of the problem, which is the carbon dioxide and the methane and the chlorofluorocarbons and nitrous oxide. And the reason it can't is because you can't take those things out of the atmosphere fast enough for human interests and for the interests of the biosphere. I know that I've heard estimates that the amount of carbon that humans have burned in the past 250 years is it took 200 million years for the Earth's plants to sequester.
Our jet stream. So the way I want to talk about this topic is first by referencing the kind of person who's kind of charting the pathway through all this, and that's Dr. Jennifer Francis at Rutgers University. Dr. Francis has been working on Arctic amplification, which a signal that was first detected in the 1990s, actually in her doctorate program. So essentially what's happened, as Dr. Francis explains it, is that since about the 1990s, what we've seen is that there is an amplification process occurring in the Arctic. That is to say that the Arctic is warming much faster than other regions around the globe. And in fact, generally when we see climate change happen, or warming episodes happen, global warming happen, we see the polar regions in general tend to warm faster, and the equatorial regions warm the least, or they warm slower than other regions around the world. So what ends up happening is the temperature gradient between the equatorial regions and the Arctic in particular begins to decline. Well, it's due to those temperature gradients that the jet stream has its strength and its stability, its form. So as the temperature gradient declines, the winds begin to weaken and they begin to elongate. That's what sinuosity is. Sinuosity is the measurement of the elongation occurring with the jet stream patterns. Now, Dr. Francis is very clear that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot more study that needs to be done, that, you know, when you're talking about something as variable as the atmosphere, you really can't say for certain if this is exactly the mechanism that we're seeing occur. But she does put some evidence forth, and one of the evidence that she puts forth is what we're seeing meteorologically. One of the examples that she uses is Hurricane Harvey. We saw Hurricane Harvey, a massive hurricane, swell up and get trapped over Houston for days at a time, allowing it to drop over 50 inches of rain. Well, that happened because the steering winds that would normally push hurricanes along were totally absent over the continental United States, allowing Harvey to essentially get stuck over land, dumping water in one area for multiple days. But also we see other things happen. The whole entire polar vortex phenomena, which I remember taking off really in 2013, 2014. It was a media sensation at the time, but that whole phenomena it gives its thanks to what's happening with the jet stream system. Essentially what happens is cold Arctic air is able to seep down into the mid-latitude regions, which can drastically change our weather. So one day we might be having weather in the 50s or the 60s, and then the next day genuinely having temperatures as high as 20 degrees or in and about. We've seen this affect our weather systems as far as heat waves, which, you know, obviously Humphrey will talk a little bit more about that. But I did just want to kind of break into this new mechanism that's kind of under intense study by climatologists and specifically atmospheric scientists, people like Dr. Jennifer Francis. So Nick, if you want to pick up and maybe elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, so so you know, Francis discovered that, basically starting in the 1990s, the jet stream began to exhibit a weakening of its mean flow around the Earth in the northern hemisphere, and that waviness or sinuosity intensified going into the 2000s and now into the 2010s, and that process is thought theorized by her to be caused by the rapid and abrupt decline of Arctic sea ice. The sea ice was considered a semi-permanent feature in the Arctic Ocean, all year round. So even in the summer, you have some retreat of the sea ice, but it was enough that it basically maintains a sort of stable state to the climate system, to the ocean atmosphere system of the Arctic. However, because you've had a rapid retreat of sea ice seasonally since the 1980s, what happens is that you get, a thinning of ice, a greater retreat of ice, loss of volume, loss of extent, and greater ocean warming in the seas, outer seas of the Arctic Ocean, and that causes an amplification of the atmosphere in the Arctic in general, but that also reduces the temperature gradient. And that's throughout the layer of the atmosphere, so it reduces essentially the steepness of the atmosphere, because the way the atmosphere works between the Arctic and the mid-latitudes is that because the mid-latitudes are generally warmer than the Arctic, the atmosphere in the Arctic is actually compressed closer to the surface than it is in the mid-latitudes. So on any given plane, constant height, there's a pressure, decrease in pressure going from the mid-latitudes to the poles that creates a pressure gradient force, which, helps keep a strong jet stream. But if the Arctic is warming, the atmosphere is also expanding, climatologically getting, higher up. And as a result, that reduces the pressure gradient and the jet stream weakens and becomes more turbulent. And that turbulence can be locally enhanced by warming of the areas that were once covered in sea ice, such as the Barents Sea, the Bering Sea, Laptev Seas. These outer seas, they spend so much time being warmed by the sun because they have no white ice cover to reflect sunlight back into space, that can make these upper level ridges, these poleward pointing areas of high pressure in the upper atmosphere, where the air flows north and then south on the other end, they get stronger, taller, bigger, more poleward, and then they stall out. They don't progress west to east as you see typically in a more normal weather pattern. And so as a result, you get these meteorologically extreme events where you get extreme heat or extreme cold or high precipitation downstream from these ridges and the huge dipping troughs where you get colder air that seeps out of the Arctic. So you see these features occur in the wintertime and in the summertime. In the summertime, they can manifest as extreme heat events, heavy precipitation events on the other end of the scale. In the winter, they can manifest as abnormally warm temperatures to extreme cold barreling out of the Arctic, where that cold would many over the course of many years in the past would stay locked in the Arctic most of the time in most years.
So let me ask, how are meteorologists and climatologists able to differentiate when we see this type of jet stream manipulation, when we see more natural weather patterns like synoptically mediated heat waves in the summer that occur, for example, in the boreal forests in the high Canadian North?
Sometimes it can be hard to differentiate, whether an event is, for sure related to, essentially climate change or not. What differentiates many times is the extreme nature of the event and our understanding of whether this, how frequently to occur, and based on the conditions we know have changed because of climate change, much more likely was this event because of climate change, and that's it's an ongoing process because people want to understand just how frequently or just how much attribution there is to these events because of climate change. But that's always a hard thing to know, in real time. I always remind people the more important issue is the accumulative effect of a combination of natural variability events and the events that are truly extreme becoming more frequent. It basically loads up on your natural systems and on your systems of civilization. So, whereas, in pre-industrial times, maybe you have, a heat wave where the temperatures would go, into the mid to upper 90s for a few days here or there, you could handle it. But then as a result of climate change, you're getting more of those events that you're more typical, but you're also getting these crazy extremes where the temperatures rise to the mid 100s, where you never had those kind of temperatures before. And the combination of all of those events loading up on each other causes more drought conditions, more fires. So it's climate change it's important to understand the processes that, to the best of our ability, how they're affecting individual events. And they're getting, scientists are getting better at those, at detection of climate change attribution, as we've seen from some of the recent hurricanes like Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Florence, and the heat waves. The heat waves are actually the easiest to attribute because they're directly related to global warming. But it's really a load up of events that are both familiar to us from the previous climate and then those that are coming up that are adding to, or an additive effect. And unfortunately, it's not an additive effect in terms of the impacts. The impacts a lot of times are nonlinear. You hit a certain tipping point and then you start getting a lot of heat-related deaths or a lot of cold-related deaths or accidents, or a lot of things that suddenly weren't a big deal suddenly become a huge deal very, very quickly?
I think what we're seeing is more properly described as climate instability. I think climate change, something that's changing, anything that's going through a transitionary phase is in a stage that is more unstable than when it's in one phase or the other. So what's happening is that our climate system is rapidly destabilizing. Comment about some of the things that we've seen where arthropods and other insects, there's been several studies released about this just recently. One of the studies came out of Germany where they were looking at specifically the biomass of flying insects in protected forest areas. So these were areas that are meant to preserve ecology to the best of our ability, given regulations, land use, and other things. And what they found is devastating. From 1989 to 2016, they saw a 75% reduction in the total biomass of flying insects in the area. 2018, just a year later, a paper came out saying that they were seeing anything between 60 to 90% biomass reproduction of insects in the rainforest in Puerto Rico. So this is serious. I think it's certainly a global thing. Like I say, when I went up to New York to visit Sandy Shallis in Angelica, New York, during the summer, I had to drive through North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And I came back and there may have been just a handful of bug splats on my car from driving that many states. Climate change is essentially what's causing this great extinction, which I think is much worse than chemicals were, right? It would be difficult, but surely we could pass policies overnight that could have some effect on changing that if it was chemical based from pesticides. But the idea that it's climate induced, and everyone now knows that we are, we're ricocheting between 0.8 to 1.2 degrees Celsius above 1880, and we have at least another degree, or at least another half a degree in the pipeline. So we're really crossing dangerous thresholds for the stability of global ecology.
Yeah, and I mean it's the to speak about instability, that's really the kicker when you're dealing with climate systems, is that the climate system isn't just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, the ocean, the cryosphere, the land, the biosphere that inhabits the land and oceans. So when you unfortunately, when you mess with one process, it can affect other parts of the system and cascading effects through the system. And it can do so in sudden and nonlinear ways that are difficult to predict. In the atmosphere, the jet stream is a big one. It pretty much, has done most of its impacts, most of its changes in just the past 15, 20 years, even though we've had rising temperatures for a while now. It just kind of hit a tipping point with the sea ice and Arctic amplification. Suddenly the jet stream started going wild. Insects, we don't really know perhaps when the decline in the insects really started or started to accelerate, but it's gone faster and faster in the past, probably in the past 30 years since it started getting warmer throughout the world in the 1980s. You look at, and it doesn't even include things such as environmental destruction and other things going on just from the growth of humanity.
Again, I like to keep on bringing up, this was in 2007, the same year the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change had won the Nobel Prize for its projections on temperature rise to 2100. The 2007 assessment that was released pointed out 3 scenarios: expected, severe, and catastrophic. The expected scenario was 1.3 degrees Celsius above 1990 baseline by 2040. Severe was 2.6 degrees Celsius above the 1990 baseline by 2040. Catastrophic was 5.6 degrees Celsius above the baseline by 2100. Okay, so it seems odd to me that we would get these type of climate assessments year after, or not year after year, but they're spaced out. But we get the climate assessment like the recent one just that came out on Friday. That to me are understating the case still based on the data that our government agencies had. I mean, this was coming from the Center of International Strategic Affairs, but this data was compiled by essentially data that was in U.S. government agencies at the time being shared with the Pentagon. So how's it that we're still so much further than what we were in 2007? Can you talk about the complacency there or the reticence? Or
Well, I think there's, I think with the government and the Pentagon, they're concerned about the survival of the of the country and specifically their ability to defend it. So a lot of times you may find I suspect the assessments from them may be more somewhat more realistic, simply because they their interests are what's going to happen to our assets, our ability to defend, fight wars. How many more wars there may be because of climate change, and countries getting desperate, and perhaps our nation getting desperate to go take over resources that are dwindling. With the IPCC and maybe the larger public assessments that get so much attention, I think and even in the assessment, there's a lot more discussion about the economy and how the economy will fare. And that seemed very conservative.
10% reduction.
Unrealistic at worst. And I think that may be a result of basically trying to not scare people. Scare people that the general public that are a part of the economic system and the economic paradigm. And this isn't necessarily a hit on capitalism per se. There's a lot of economic systems where they involve the destruction of the environment to grow, and unfortunately, to admit that that can turn against us and end up destroying our very ability to grow further because we've grown too much and destroyed too much around us. That's not really something that can be fully admitted, because the IPCC's purpose is to provide, a comprehensive scientific, evidence of what's happened to the climate so far and what they believe can happen in the future, so governments can do something to mitigate or adapt against it. Even in their very conservative assessment, that's what they do. And so saying that there could be such catastrophic impacts that the economy could basically fail, and we may not be able to have economic growth as we know it anymore. Even that, a lot of people could be displaced, die. That's not really something that, it's just say it the way it is. It's not something they want to advertise out fully, and it's just not advertised. Professor, Kevin Anderson in the UK, he's been very prominent in discussions of how the IPCC does things in his participation in the process. Stated that basically 4C may not be viable for an organized, community, human community on this planet, meaning civilization would collapse, because how are you going to feed 7 or 9 billion people? How are you going to provide enough water for 7 or 9 billion people? Already a couple billion people on this earth have trouble getting food, so but that risk of going to 4C, 5C, that's in these existing reports, but nobody talks about what the implications of them are, because
implications are that the world as we know it right now, forget the possibility of like a mass extinction event or all that other stuff, just the world as we know it ends. It ends. There's no way it can continue. It's going to end. So.
Well, what I think is kind of interesting about this whole conversation is that, because I think there's a point to be understood here as well, right? So in 2007, IPCC says 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. You got the age of consequences saying upward of 5 degrees Celsius. Mm-hmm. You got the current climate assessment report saying anywhere between 3 and 5. But I think what people are missing out of this conversation is the paleoclimatological angle here. I mean, you're really talking about a temperature rise that hasn't been experienced on Earth for tens of millions of years. And, yes. you're talking about rushing there. A decade, a century, that's almost irrelevant to ask that for the species on the planet. The question, are we going to hit 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 within 100 years or within 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 40 years or 70 or 80 is I think that part of the discussion is also kind of absent here. And I don't think, why is it absent from the conversation? Is it because it's part of that scare factor? Or is it because there's a conservative bias by people who are modelers and they just can't put together how that type of climatic change affects the biosphere?
Yeah, I think there's a difficulty in perhaps mentally just quantifying just how extreme that is. I've had discussions with people about not just the total change in temperature, but also the rate of change. I know there was a study done about, I think it was in 2004, and it said that right now, and by the way, right now up to this point, at least up until recent years, we've been going up about 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. And it was stated in 2004 that if we start going up 0.3%, 0.3 C per decade, that 15% of ecosystems on Earth will not be able to adapt. So, an ecosystem is a collection of different species that are interacting with each other, with some sort of balance. And those within a given environment, if you get that massive environmental change, some species fail, others perhaps temporarily at least blossom, and you get imbalances, and ecosystems collapse. A really famous idea of this is the coral reefs. The coral reefs are dying from these massive bleaching events. If the coral reefs and coral, especially shallow water coral, if they go extinct, then you end up having a disastrous impact going up the food chain, which includes humans. And they also stated that if we start going up 0.4 C per decade, then literally all ecosystems known on Earth would likely face collapse or be destroyed. And with, some more opportunistic species dominating and others going extinct. So, when you look at the changes that have occurred over the past 10,000 years, or what we call the Holocene, and then before that, through the end of the Ice Age, our rate of change in temperature so far is been nearly 200 times faster than it was during the Holocene, where most of that earlier part of the period, like 3,000 years ago, we were mostly steady, and then for about 4,000 or 5,000 years, we've been going back to a gradual global cooling over a course of 5,000 years up until the pre-industrial period, when we started going to industrialization. And even during the end of the Ice Age, when we were 4 C colder than pre-industrial roughly, and rose up rapidly, was over maybe 2,000 or 3,000 years, not you know, and a lot of it was actually drawn out over about 10,000 or 11,000 years, but there was a period where it was fastest over a course of like 2,000 or 3,000 years, you know, going up about 0.5 degree Celsius. But here we're talking about going up, you know, 6 degrees in, you know, a span of like 100 years, you know, 115 years. Yeah, it's the pace, the ability to adapt, whether it's humans, whether it's other species on the planet, the ability to adapt is a function of the rate of change in the system. The faster the rate of change is, the lower the ability to adapt. So it's, you know, sort of inversely proportional, but it may be even worse than that, because these, we would consider by human standpoint, small changes become absolutely catastrophic the more in magnitude they go and the faster the rate that they move. So, you know what that means for us is that it means that, you know, you were trying to think, oh, we're gonna, you know, I've heard all sorts of ideas like trying to like genetically engineer crops to deal with more heat, or trying to like build seawalls, and you know our human ability to adapt to things is based on literally thousands of years to be able to deal with small changes. When those changes are catastrophically fast, then we're just lost, because we can't outthink speed. And I don't know if people are really grasping that. Mostly reason they can't grasp it is because nobody's really reminding people that how horrible those rates of change really are to everything that they depend on. Everything that they depend on, every you know, crop that we have, every building that we build to deal with the weather, you know, everything depends on stability. And if we can't ever be more than 2 or 3 steps behind the rate of change, then, you know, then we face the catastrophic or existential threat that's a lot worse than people realize.
So when the IPCC warns, and I think there's a really good context. So when the IPCC warns about catastrophe 2030, what is that real? Is that what you're talking about? Is we're at a period of essentially falling behind the rate of change, that we can't keep up anymore as a civilization to the changes that are occurring that have been induced by our climate?
Yeah, I mean, there's really no other way to put it. We're falling significantly behind. I mean, to have done this the kind of things that we need to do to stave off this catastrophe would have been challenging. I mean, minus the technological issues, is because technology was very different in the, you know, back in the day than it is in 2018. But minus even that, say we could have come up with all these sorts of these technological innovations, it would have been very challenging to accomplish in the 1950s, 1960s, you know, with the number of people on the planet, the amount of carbon that had been released into the atmosphere in 1955, 1960, the challenges of trying to stabilize, get off fossil fuels. That it would have been, you know, maybe challenging is a poor word. It would have been Herculean in 1960 in the Kennedy era to do what we're trying to accomplish, you know, because people just don't really understand. Like, in order to, and I've been really trying to hammer this with people lately, you know, like they talk about we have 12 years to get off, you know, to get 50% of emissions from 2010. You know, it's not really we have 12 years. We have to start literally doing it right now and declining all the way to 2030.
Yeah.
But what people don't really understand is that in order to get off of business as usual, you have to use business as usual. You have to, I mean, like, how are you going to build the global renewable infrastructure? How are you going to build the carbon capture and storage technology to scale that has to remove tens of, you know, billions of tons of carbon from the atmosphere every single year, while hopefully humans are somehow trying to reduce consumption and not put so much in the atmosphere every single year at the same time on the planet. But there is 100% certainty that our ability to be extant or extinct depends on on the ability of other species to deal with the same climate change and the same ecological damage that we as humans have produced, to survive. And so, so that's basically the way it is. We are not exempt from nature, and so nature, if it changes because in response to what we've done and what continues to be done to the planet, we may not be able to fit into that framework. I just saw someone say that they don't accept extinction. I don't accept it either, but there are, realities that we have to face based on our biological limitations, and so it's just the way it is.
Well, so one thing I want to do is I want to respond to that point as well about accepting extinction. But before I do that, I also want to now open up the comment section for questions to me or Nick or both of us as well. But this whole idea about accepting extinction, I'm 25 years old. I don't want any of this to be happening. And the same person, I was reading your comments, I think they're interesting, said that it was her generation. So my mom and my grandparents, it was their generation to responsibility to reduce carbon emissions. And it would be my generation then responsibility to sequester carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Firstly, I don't think for us, for people like you and me, when these systems start coming down around us, I can't say if the human species is going to go extinct this century.
Yeah.
But in one sense, as we go down this century, we will get at a point where it appears for us that things are just headed catastrophically downhill.
Yeah.
I accept that in my life. I accept now that the Great Expansion is over, that the post-war living arrangement is now over, that these things cannot, we reached peak. We reached peak economy. We reached peak consumption. Those things are now on a decline. And so I can't expect to, this idea, there's iPhone 10 now, right? Is there going to be an iPhone 100 now? And I accept that. And I accept that this will probably overtake my life. I understand that. But when you realize what you said earlier is that we are going to die anyways, recognizing this doesn't do anything, but it puts the existential crisis back in our life that had always been there. And that gives us, I think, an opportunity to live with some dignity. That now we can do things understanding that no, we were not gods, no, we were not going to live forever, but now we can do things with a sense of urgency, with a sense of love, with a sense of care, while accepting that we still are looking at oblivion. I mean, in Christological language, they say that you cannot save yourself, your works cannot save you. Now true is that for us in the secular world. But we can still perform good works and do good things for the planet, for other earthlings, and for the people we love.
Yeah. On the some commenter brought up the issue of fatalism. This isn't fatalism. Fatalism to me is basically you just give up, surrender, and that's the end of it. Admitting that there's a possibility, maybe even a likelihood. It's hard, that there could be an ending to the human story. That's just, that's just reality, like it is. If there were most of the species on the planet, like 95% of the species have gone extinct no matter how long they've been on the earth. But saying, at the same time, as you say, we're still here, and there are things that we could be doing, to be compassionate to each other and to the planet. And we're not even doing, and most of at least the governments of the world that supposedly represent us aren't largely doing those things. I mean, I've spoken about, why are we still building more and more, houses and hotels and everything else right along the coast when we know that those areas are just not going to exist in maybe even in 30 years because of sea level rise? Why don't we know the storms are going to get more powerful? They're going to get more violent. You're going to see a lot more Hurricane Michaels, Hurricane Harveys, and all of this. Why not, set land use practices, reforest or those areas or whatever was there in terms of flora, fauna before humans took over those areas, and retreat from those areas so that they at least can flood without humans being there to die. Why not come up with global policy for dealing with transporting transport of goods and other services and other trade practices to try to limit carbon emissions in the atmosphere? Even if we can't do this, like drop it in 12 years stuff, I mean, that it seems pretty comical, but you can still do a lot of things to limit CO2 emissions. And why don't we come up with ways to reduce food waste and water waste when we know both of those are going to become limited severely because of climate change? Why not promote in a lot of countries that are frankly very conservative, either religiously or for other reasons? They don't allow their the females of their population to be able to control their own ability to have children. And I'm not one of these people that bashes third world countries for having lots of babies, because a lot of it is the lack of control that women have over their own reproduction in those countries. And so, there are a lot of things, again, migration of people, from the tropics. Why not do things to control that? To help people that move up here have the ability to be fed and be clothed and be treated with respect. So it's a matter of a compassion for people and compassion for the biosphere. And if we're not doing that, then I don't know what else we can do to help our people on this planet. Important thing people just need to remember when it comes to climate change is it's really as Dar Jamal puts it, climate chaos or climate instability. And the challenge is we've done as humans, and it's not our fault. We're born into this world. We're given the resources, the tools that were done before us, and the fossil fuel industry, even knowing the effects of it, gave us all of these tools to try to use to help build the economy and participate in the economy, even though they knew it would destroy us. But the reality is that there's profound changes to our planet that we've already committed to, but in this instability that we face, I think it's important to remember what's important, which is not so much about building the material wealth and doing all of these things that we've been taught to do all these years. It's also about it's really about doing things that that take care of your family, take care of yourself, holistically, and show respect for the planet, which has been not something that anybody has ever taught in schools or anything. But unfortunately, if we had, maybe decades ago, we wouldn't have been in the position that we have to face now because of all of that's been done in terms of global warming, environmental destruction, and overall climate chaos. So that's really, I can you can talk about data and nuts and bolts and everything else, but it's really about living your life to care about the your fellow human being and your fellow plants and animals in the natural world around you. And I think that's the most important thing that we can do, no matter what the path lies in the next coming years or decades.
Well, thank you, Nick Humphrey, for that. I guess my closing words to our viewers tonight. How do we face catastrophe? How do we deal with what is coming when our best science now tells us it's locked in, we are committed, and it is inevitable? It's multi-generational. It exploits the worst of us, our greatest iniquities, our greatest inequalities, our greatest inequities. It pins neighborhood against neighbors, brother against brother, nation against nation. It challenges us and our very being on this planet. We're seeing many of the species that we grew up with destined to disappear and never to be seen by our own children. We're seeing the loss of the ice caps, glaciers, physical features of the planet, whether it be parts of forest dying for this or that reason. And it's starting to have an emotional toll on many of us. So one thing that I have always taken to heart that gets me to move, despite the enormity of the challenges we face, is that action is the antidote to despair. That it's very important no matter what stage. I'll take on this last issue of this debate that's kind of emerging. The issue is it too late, or do we still have time? The naysayers say it's too late, and those who are unwarrantedly optimistic say we still have time. The truth is, it is too late for many of us. It's too late for the Bangladeshis. It's too late for the Pacific Nation Islanders. It's too late for many species that go extinct every year. It's too late for our children in a lot of ways to live the way that we did. But it's not too late to do the right thing. It's not too late to start trying to initiate change in your own life, in your own community, in your country. It's not too late to fight for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. It's not too late to try to get the emissions down at Appalachian State University. It's not too late to try to do the right thing for our future generations. Thank you, viewers, being here with us at the rising tide. The tide is rising. Stay local, stay good, stay true, and we'll see you next time on the Environmental Coffee House. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Good night.
Thank you.